the 7-generation philosophy that the decisions you make today, I'm not going to get this perfectly, but the decisions that you make today should lead to a sustainable future 7 generations down the line. And that's really powerful if you think about it in terms of your leadership. 7 generations from now, people are going to still be carrying the things that you pass down to them. So what are those things that you're going to be passing down? What are you unintentionally passing down that's harmful, that you can do something about right now?
Hi, Embracing Only family. We are back again with another amazing episode. And I am so happy to introduce you today to Shiva Roofeh. We are so honored to talk to her. So Shiva is a self-described curious rebel, secret punk, perpetual smiler, partner, culture creator, learning design specialist. She's worked at all levels of organizations, from director to individual contributor, in small startups as well as established businesses. If that wasn't enough, Shiva has quite the interesting backstory. She's been a refugee, an immigrant, a migrant, and she's lived and worked in 6 countries across Asia, Europe, and North America. Shiva says that her lived experience is as valuable as her work experience, and she leverages both to create mile-deep change and relationships with and for her clients. She's worked with Fortune 500 companies, helping leaders be and do better by understanding their systemic, collective, and individual power so they can use it in service of the greater good. Shiva, it is such a pleasure to have you with us here today.
Same. Thank you so much for having me.
Jump right into it here because I have a ton of questions about your absolutely spectacular work. But I guess I'll start with this one. For a lot of us, we get stuck in the corporate machine. We never find our way out of it. And it sounds like by the nature of your work, you're really tackling some of the most unpleasant parts of being with corporate. Mm-hmm. So what prompted you to start this leadership culture for focused career? Was there a catalyst that happened while you were in corporate that pushed you out to do this work?
I think I never really fit into corporate, to be perfectly honest. And I knew, as long as I can remember, I knew I never wanted to have a 9-to-5 job. I knew I wanted to travel the world. I knew I just couldn't do the typical things expected of me. But I tried, of course, because I drank juice. I went through the factory that we all go through, especially living in North America. So I tried to work in an organization, and one of the first real jobs that I had was as the director of studies at a language academy. And we had gotten to the point where our students, their English language level was just too high anyway. We need to do something else. And it was just pure coincidence, which it drives me nuts because no matter how much you try to plan your life, one small thing, in this case, it was literally an article that I read that changed everything for me. So at the same time that we were trying to think of what else can we do in the academy, I read an article on, my mind wants to go into the depth of the article, but I'll try to zoom out. So the article in general was around cultural differences and how that came into play and led to a lot of plane crashes, I think in the 1970s when different companies were merging. So you had North American Airlines and Korean Airlines merging together, and this is it's a horrible way to discover this, but when they were listening to the black box recordings of the plane crashes, they started to notice there was a difference in not the words being said, but what was being understood between the pilots and the co-pilots. And as they investigated further, they started to realize the pilot from North America has a very direct communication style, whereas the one from South Korea, has a much more indirect communication style, especially since they were co-pilot speaking to the pilot. So power dynamics coming in there. And as I was reading that, I'm like, this makes sense. This makes so much sense. And it made so much sense to me. I realized because of my background of being both Iranian and then also being raised in the United States, I can understand multiple cultures. So from that one article, I was like, I got to do this. This is what I have to get into. I have to learn more about this. So I started to research cultural intelligence. I found as much material as I could, which at that point wasn't so much. It was a fairly new field in the West, in the global minority. And then at that time, there wasn't so much appetite for that kind of content and information and knowledge where I was living in Spain. And a friend said, well, you should get into leadership development because there's all this, everyone wants to do leadership development in corporate. what the hell is this thing of leadership development? And as I'm researching it, I'm like, it's everything and nothing at the same time. But as I got more and more into it, I started to realize a lot of the foundations are similar. So it's a lot around understanding your paradigms. What are the deep-seated beliefs that structure your understanding of the world, that then lead to your behaviors, that then lead to policies, to processes, to different practices, to the cultures that we create? And so that was the start of it. Like that one freaking article that I read just happened to come across at this time when I actually had power in an organization to do something about it. So those two things converged, the magic of space and time coming together, that led to where I am right now.
Amazing. I love that because a lot of people read articles like this because we go to MBA programs, we read articles and we're like, that's a cool case study. How am I going to talk about it? What grade am I going to get? But I think I don't want to use the word rich, but you're absolutely nuanced background of all the different spaces you've had to be in, show up in as probably like the only, as you said, in all these different spaces that probably informed your ability to then take action from what you read in a way in which that drives further impact. And so I want to unpack a little bit of what Olivia said in her bio, where she, I guess it was your words that she used in the bio introduction, where she mentioned that my lived experience is as valuable as my work experience. You're a firm believer of this. And in the corporate space, that a lived experience being like, show me your work experience. So how do individuals navigating these corporate like labyrinths really lean into that lived experience to show up, to claim the impact that they can make?
I think speaking into it, so not shying away from your lived experience, that's what's worked for me at least, right? Every time I'm pitching to a client, and usually there's like a few of us and we have to introduce ourselves, a few of us, a few consultants. I noticed that my global minority siblings are just presenting their education background, the MBA that they have, the school that they went to, all the companies they worked at, whatever. I don't talk about any of that. Like when it gets to me, I tell them the whole spiel and I tell them like, I'm going to tell you about my life because that is the thing that informs my work the most. So I talk about being born in the middle of a war, of being born to a Muslim mother and a Jewish father, of being a refugee at the age of 4, of moving to New York City, all of that, right? I never mention the school that I went to. I never mention what I studied, and I never mention the organizations I work with. So I think really taking the space and time to explore your own story and how you got to where you are, because I think we also take that for granted. And I think as the global majority, our minds have been colonized in a sense to think that we are less than. And so we don't allow ourselves often the space and time to really value the lived experiences that we had. We're also told often that our experience is not universal, but in many ways it is because we are the majority. So I think depending on where you're working, it is of great value to bring in that lived experience and make it known. But to do that, what's helped me again is like for the past, I don't know how many years now, like maybe 8 years, practicing what that story is, changing it and shifting as my understanding of my story has changed and shifted. But I will also say that it's a little easier for me to do that because of my proximity to whiteness. I know this is a podcast, folks can't see me, but I'm very white passing. I've got green eyes, I've got much lighter skin. In Europe in general, I'm not seen as something exotic. I'm just seen as something unique and different. And so that does also help.
I think it's the part about what is your origin story, understanding that is so critical. I'm absolutely on my journey of figuring that out because contextually, your origin story needs to be delivered different ways, piecemeal differently.
And also I've noticed for most folks, just asking that question, tell me about yourself. Like a lot of folks freeze. We just don't know how to answer that. And it should be the easiest thing to answer in the sense that we are the only person who knows our story. We are the only person who knows the full depth and nuance of our own story. So it's taking that time and space and giving yourself credit that your lived experience is valuable. Mind you, I also personally think that, like, how do I say this in a way that is not triggering? I don't believe in formal education. I don't believe that is the best thing out there. I don't think that's a measure of our worth or our value. I think that's something that society has put on us. And when I made that mental shift, it was a lot easier to speak into my story and let that be my credibility than whatever certificates or degrees I have.
Shiva, I have so much to unpack. I'm like, how much time do we have? Because you've already said a couple things This is why I love this podcast, because I feel like we meet such fascinating people. And sometimes we have these impressions that our comments are not going to be received well, when in reality, there's more of us that secretly align than, than we realize, right? Well, let's dial it back just a little bit, because you said quite a mouthful. I think first I want to dig into, most of the people in our audience that listen to this podcast are in some phase of their either corporate journey or their transition out of corporate into doing something themselves. Now, I'll speak more about the people that are in their corporate journey. I think Archita does more on the helping people pivot side of things. But something that you said, you read one article and it was like, holy crap, I'm interested. And you were able to, I don't know if this was quick or not for you, you'll have to tell us, but you were able to look back at your life and be like, holy crap, this aligns perfectly. I'm going to go chase this rabbit. You allowed yourself, you trusted yourself, I think is the word that I'm looking for, to embrace this passion and turn it into the next chapter. So for the women that are out there that may have these passions, but they don't have the courage to step out of what feels safe and comfortable to chase the rabbit, as I like to call it, what would you say to them?
Another great question. I'll share how I did it. I wasn't financially safe enough to just run with this by myself. I couldn't quit my job in a second and just go off. So I looked at the resources I had within me. So exactly as you said, Olivia, looking back at my life, I'm like, oh, this makes sense. My entire 30 plus years of life fits perfectly into understanding this one freaking article. But then I also looked at the resources I had immediately accessible to me. Again, it helps that I was in a position of power in the organization, right? I was the one responsible for designing the programs that we would be pitching and selling to our clients. So what I did was, I was like, all right, I'm going to use this opportunity as my own internship in a sense, right? I'm going to investigate this. I'm going to research as much as I can online. I'm going to do all the readings I can. I'm going to read all the books, sign up for courses, learn a little bit more. And I'm going to develop a curriculum for this and then pitch it to my clients. But I am also going to pitch myself as the trainer, which was not normally what we would do. We would present different faculty to do this, but also looking at my faculty, I'm like, I don't think we got anyone really who can do this. So it is the best option for the organization, and it's also a good option for me. I used to, unfortunately, be in that mindset of just giving everything for the company and not taking anything for myself. And that's something I had to learn to change as well. This is a give and take. This is a financial transaction. Part of it is I am giving you my work and labor in exchange for money to be able to survive and live. But at the same time, you're getting a lot more than what I'm getting. So what else can I make sure I get from this transaction? So I developed the curriculum, I pitched it to the clients, and I told them I will be the one delivering it. I convinced my boss to do it, which was easy again, because it was a small organization. He knew me very well. And then I was sent out into the field to deliver the program. And that was my kind of internship, because I'd never delivered content like this before, ever. And also to make it ethical for me, I kind of convinced my boss, we're going to charge more than our normal prices, but we're not going to charge as much as what's out there in the market, only because I don't feel so comfortable doing that, because I know it's my first time delivering. The clients don't need to completely know that detail, but it makes it feel a little bit more ethical on our end. So I spent the next, I don't know how many years it was at this point, but the first iteration was, we had 20 hours a week divided into two. So we had 10 different groups every week coming in for a period of 3 months to do this. And we just did that on rotate for several years because the client loved it so much. And so then by the time that I finished doing that project, which I think was minimum 2 years, I was like, I could do this. I can take this out. I can leave the workplace if I want to, or I can go to another workplace and take this rich experience with me. And in the meantime, something else that I did was not just the delivering of not just doing this new project, but it was also meeting other people who are also working in cultural intelligence, going to the different conferences, pitching to speak at the conferences, just trying to make myself become a name in that sphere, so that if and when I decide to move forward with this, take that rabbit hole and bring it out into another organization or out into the world, I will be known for it in some way or another. So again, just using that experience as my own personal paid internship to learn and to get something more for myself than just the money I was receiving.
Hi, everyone. My name is Olivia Cream. If you are a corporate girly and you are struggling, you're feeling stuck, maybe you're feeling underpaid, overqualified, you're struggling with your boss, or bigger yet, you're even trying to clearly articulate what it is that you want from your corporate career, I am the coach for you. So if you're ambitious and you've got goals to accomplish and you want to accomplish them quickly, check out my website, oliviacream.com. I would love to help you reach your goals.
Hi, everybody. I'm Archita Fritz, your other host of the Embracing Only podcast. If you're ready to leave corporate or you've changed a couple of corporate jobs and want to start a profitable side brilliance, you've made the decision, but you feel unsure of the next steps, here's how I can help you. I can guide you through a successful transition to entrepreneurship to help turn those ideas into profit. So reach out to me on LinkedIn or visit me on architafritz.com to accelerate your empowered transitions. Now, back to the episode.
Absolutely love that. I love how it's a bridge plan, right?
Yes,
You're like,
yes.
I know where I'm going. Here's my bridge. Here's what I want out of this. And I think it's so important. I'll move on to the next topic after I say this, but I think it's so important that with every step you took, it was very intentional.
Yes.
You knew exactly why you were doing it, what you were getting out of it, and that it was a step closer to your end goals. Ladies, pay attention. Pay attention here. Okay. Okay, so back to another comment that you made here that I'm just like tingling to ask you about. So you made the comment that you're white passing, which obviously means that you have observed non-white passing folks maybe trying to do the same thing, maybe having adjacent experiences. Can you talk a little bit about why you specifically chose to call that out, what prompted that, and maybe what you've seen in your work, and any tips or tricks that you would have for our listeners that aren't white passing on how they can excel in a similar fashion?
I will do my best. I mean, I am white passing, so I don't know how much I can speak into what will work for someone who's not white passing, but I'll share what has worked for me when I have been the darkest person in the room. Which, again, if y'all can see me, that's saying a lot because I'm pretty freaking white. So when I moved to Europe, I still came with the concept of not being white that was driven into me in the United States. Even though I grew up in New York City, which is very diverse, I was still never allowed to be USian. And I'm very clear on saying USian, not American, because America is the entire freaking landmass. So I came with this idea that I am not white. And then when I came to Europe, I still had that in mind. That was still a perspective that I had. And then over time, I started to, I just started to realize my body was much more relaxed. And I couldn't figure out why. And then in 2020, with the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, which were just one of many that had already happened, but being in lockdown, I had to start facing things that I had chosen to ignore in the past. And one of those things was realizing the reason why my body is so much more calm here is that here, especially in Spain, where I live, I look Spanish. People have no idea. And the difference in treatment is drastic. And I had noticed the difference in treatment, but I think I was still so stuck in my concept of not being white that I refused to accept that I'm being treated differently because I'm white passing. And so that was the first time I really started to realize, holy shit, they think I'm white. And like the comments, like the stuff that they tell you because they think that you're white, the obvious difference in treatment by the police, by the immigration officers, by everybody. I'm like, oh my God, this is what it is to be white. Holy crap, who knew? So I think that's when I started to use the term white passing, because that is literally what I feel I am in this context, right? It changes regionally and there's also global narratives, but in this context, I am white and that gives me tremendous power. And people don't know that I'm not white until I tell them. They might just think like, my name's Shiva. They honestly think that my parents were hippies of some sort. They have absolutely no idea. Yes, no joke. Yes, right? They're like, oh, you're named after the Indian goddess. One, they always think it's a goddess. I'm like, no, it's a god. And it's Hindu, not necessarily just Indian. And they just really genuinely think that my parents were hippies. So that's what I started to realize, wow, they have no clue. They have no idea. So that's that first question. This is where that concept of realizing that I'm white passing and understanding the power that comes with that and the privilege that comes with that. That's how that came about. And then the second question was around, what was the second question? Apologies.
Well, the second question, if you've made this observation of how the white passing helps you, any recommendations for people that aren't white passing to thrive in that environment? But now that I hear the story, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if you're going to have any recommendations, but it's totally a thing. I could definitely resonate with that because the anxiety that I feel sometimes being here in the States, when I go back to Jamaica, which is where I'm from, completely gone. Yes. You're right. Something happens to you, your shoulders lower, that you're just not so, maybe the word is alert. You're not so alert and you're able to breathe a little bit. So that's very interesting.
Oh, absolutely. And in terms of advice, again, I am white passing in this context. So I can maybe give advice on not so much the white passing, but for folks who are not white passing, but just folks who are obviously othered. Because in some contexts, that's still very much relevant in my life. Power always plays a part in this. So the stuff that's worked for me, which again may not work for others, is one, that owning of my story, learning to have a strong voice in pushing back with kindness, because some folks just can't handle the pushback they should be getting. And ally is not the right word, but finding the people in the organizations that have more power than me, who are open to understanding the difference in power that I have because of my identities and are willing to advocate for me. One of my clients, there's a woman, she's a white woman, she's very high up in the organization. And I don't know, we just connected in some way. And I sensed that openness and started to build that friendship. And I do see her advocating for me left and center. I do see her putting me forward for clients that I know other people would never do. I see her intentionally trying to be equitable in the way that she treats me and the way that she tries to make spaces safe for me to think about me, because I am the other person freaking almost always in these organizations. So it's just like, it kind of sucks because it feels like you got to play part of the game because it's cozying up to power, but it's cozying up to power with the intention of helping to funnel that power into something positive for the rest of us.
I love that. I could keep going with the question. I'm going to take a breath and let Archita chime in here because I'm so fascinated with you and your work.
Yeah, no, I'm just like reflecting a lot, quite frankly, because I'm thinking about what you just mentioned of how all of these individuals will exist on a team, right? Individuals feeling othered, individuals who suddenly recognize, wow, in this context, I have power that I've never had before. And then individuals, just because of the way they look, they already have the power as they walk into the room. So as a leader of a team, there's that culture that's automatically formed as because of all these different actors that are present. How do you pay attention and actively ensure that these actors show up in a functional way and not in a dysfunctional way that continues to make the folks who feel othered and the individuals that suddenly have recognized their power be like, what would it feel like to use it and misuse it? Because this dynamic tends to happen in shape. So as leaders of teams, like, how do you pay attention to it? How do you first educate yourself?
Oof.
And then pay attention to it? It's so critical.
That's a lifelong journey, right? There's no quick fix to this. Understanding yourself, because what I'm hearing in that question is basically, how do you help leaders, or how can a leader get themselves to start recognizing their own biases so that they can start noticing the inequities and inequalities in their teams? What's helped me is like approaching things from genuine curiosity, which is hard to do. And when you feel those moments of being triggered by something, allow your defenses to go down and ease into that trigger with the curiosity. So, for example, during my time as a leader, I came across, or not came across, someone shared with me the 15 characteristics of white supremacy culture by Tema Okin, which is a beautiful resource if you all get a chance to explore it. The website is just an absolute gem of a resource. It is written with so much love. It's amazing. And as I read through the different characteristics, I was reading on it on my laptop. I was so freaking triggered. I slammed my laptop shut. I shoved it away from me. If I could, I would have thrown it across the room because I was so damn triggered because I saw myself in all of those characteristics. So being faced with your own biases, your own prejudices is really freaking hard. And I knew I had a choice in that moment. I can reject this and say, no, this is not me. This is not true. Or I can open the laptop again, take it little by little, spend the time and space over months, over years, and just dive into this. And that's what I chose. I chose to do that. I chose to get curious about it. I chose to read the whole website. It took me about a year to go through a grieving process. And I think this is what I mean by it's lifelong work. And if a leader truly wants to be able to help their team be as equitable as possible and to not tolerate the othering of others and not tolerate the dehumanization and really notice all that in themselves, and then to ultimately be able to change the processes and policies that they have power over in the organization to make things more equitable, right? To create that systemic change and to create a culture of fairness and justice in the organization. It does start with yourself. And that really does start with the curiosity, but you have to understand that there's a lot of anger and frustration and loss that's going to be coming. And I think this is what holds people back. They know it's going to be painful. There's something inside of us that knows it's hard work. So what that hard work looked like for me was once I got curious, once I started to read through it, it was looking back at my entire life and seeing the ways that I was perpetuating supremacy culture and inequity and unfairness without realizing. And coming to terms with all the unintentional harm that I had done, all the ways that I had misused my power without realizing I was misusing it. And that is like an ego death, right? My sense of myself was dying. We think that death is just a physical thing. It's not. So many things in our life die. And I needed to give the time and space to mourn that death. And it took me a year. It took me a year to mourn this idea of myself that I had built up. But I made a lot of mistakes at that time. I still kept on getting triggered. I was like rushing into things because once you realize something, you want to immediately make it better. And you mess up because you don't know. You haven't learned yet how to do things in a different way. So after that year of mourning, and for other people, it might be less, it might be more. I started to actively think of what are the ways that I'm running my business, the team, the people I'm working with, my providers. What do I need to do differently? And there's no guidebook for this. There's no freaking checklist of this. There's nothing that tells you this is how to be a fair leader. It just doesn't exist. And so I had to make it myself. But another key part of this is not doing it alone. You are responsible for doing it. That's what I mean by making it myself. But I'm not the only person going through this. So I started to speak to my providers. I started to speak to my clients. I started to speak with the people on my team, having these conversations to understand in which ways have I not been equitable, in which ways are things not fair? What are you doing? What's working for you? Have you been through this before? And actively finding people in community. And by community, my community is mostly online. So through LinkedIn, I found a ton of people who were speaking into this already and learning from them and also paying them, not just learning for free, but paying them for that learning. So again, this is the roundabout scenic route answer to the question, but because there is no clear-cut answer to that.
That is the ultimate truth, Shiva, is that us attending a unconscious bias training and then attending an unconscious bias training part 2, and then another allyship training part 3 doesn't give us the ability to check. I'm now walking spaces and suddenly I recognize inequities around me.
Exactly.
That is garbage. That is such garbage. And I appreciate that organizations are doing the training to start the conversations. Great. But that's just the beginning. That is just
Exactly.
point negative 15, right? Then you have got to do the work to then walk the path,
Exactly.
to then consciously recognize how am I interacting and acting in spaces. And everything that you shared, it just reminded me and it triggered actually a couple of
I
different.
see it. I see it happening,
Sorry, my
Archita.
face is out of my face. But it's all good. It's good for the following reasons because you spoke about ego death. I had my own ego death in 2021. So I went through an experience of bullying and harassment at work. And through that experience, I had to finally recognize what aspects of this behavior I am unable to tolerate. Right? Why is it so triggering to me that I feel bullied? I feel harassed? And so it was like a year before I even recognized I was bullied and harassed. I started having these conversations with myself and I started recognizing, like, oh my gosh, I have certain behaviors like this, or I've had behaviors like this because I was close to a kind of power that was very different from me, that didn't look like me, that didn't talk like me, but I was emulating the power because I thought that was the way in which to show up. And so when I had that reckoning, I made a list of people I perceived to have hurt in my early journey as a leader. And I called every one of them. And it was the hardest freaking thing to do. I don't know if I've told you this, Olivia, but I called every one of them. Maybe I have. I sat with two of them face to face, where I apologized. And I didn't do this for a check mark for myself or a pat on the back, but I literally had to have my ego die to let go of those behaviors that were toxic, that were learned toxic behaviors on my journey of leadership that I had to unlearn for me to then accept that I should not be treated this way. And so when you said this, like I felt every emotion as I was sitting with these individuals because one of the guy, I will still remember it, he never expected that he would ever. I always was nice because you can be nice. As I was in this situation, 3 companies coming together, I was thrown in lead. And I was like, I don't freaking know what the heck I'm doing. Yes, I'm going to lead because I was meant to lead. This is what I'm supposed to do. Let's go. And so I did things that I was not proud of. And so when I went back to this individual, wow, you're actually apologizing to me. And I was like, yes, I'm doing it. You don't need to forgive me. I'm not looking for any of that. I'm doing it to say that this was not okay. You should never have to tolerate it. And please call this out if you can, if you feel like you can next time. I thought I would never hear from this individual. And then literally 1 month ago, they reached out to me to ask for a recommendation. Can you imagine? I just was like, I am so glad you killed that ego. You went through that process, not because they say, what is that called? Heal bridges and all this jazz. When you have wronged people in your own journey of discovery, you still have a chance to go back and reconcile, irrespective of expecting anything back from them. Reconcile with pieces of yourself that you can fix and heal and be better for others that you lead moving forward.
I love all that. Can I jump in there for a second? Thank you for sharing that. It's not an easy thing to share. And I love that you did that going back and apologizing. It's something I haven't done yet. And I say yet because it's been on my mind to do as well. I'm just trying to formulate for myself to get into words the things that I know I did wrong. But I might just go and have a blanket apology and be like, I know I did things wrong. And I can't pinpoint exactly what it is. My memory sucks. But I know I did not do well. I didn't do well by you. And another part of that is this thing that I was going to say, I call ancestral leadership. It's not just my term. A lot of folks use this. And it's that idea of it goes both ways. So the way that we lead is something that we learned, right? We learned it from the people around us. And that's not just the bosses that we had, but also the people in our communities, our families, etc. But in the work context, it is especially potent because, like you said, you look at the leaders above you. This is what success is. This is what I got. This is what it looks like. So we unconsciously take on the good, the bad, the beautiful, the ugly of those that were our leaders. And we replicate those behaviors and we replicate those paradigms without realizing. And a lot of folks don't want to accept that. A lot of folks want to think, no, like I had a really bad leader and I strive to be the complete opposite of them. And I think that's not possible unless you're really conscious of the ways that you are showing up that are not good. Like you have to accept that we're not just good, we're also bad. And so there's a lot of these things that seep into us without us realizing. We have inherited it, but we didn't realize we inherited it and we're passing it down. That's why that word, like Olivia, when you said the intentionality, it is really important, that intentionality. And that intentionality also comes from really accepting that we are not good people, because we are both good and we are bad. And we have inherited both the good and the bad. And then what we're passing down to others is just going to create this constant cycle and domino effect. They're going to take us as the idea of what leadership is, and they're going to move forward our same behaviors, right? So even if we don't have children, we're passing shit down constantly, right? And it makes me think of the Iroquois idea that the 7-generation philosophy, that the decisions you make today, I'm not going to get this perfectly, but the decisions that you make today should lead to a sustainable future 7 generations down the line.
Mm. Wow.
And that's really powerful if you think about it in terms of your leadership. 7 generations from now, people are going to still be carrying the things that you pass down to them. So what are those things that you're going to be passing down? What are you unintentionally passing down that's harmful, that you can do something about right now?
That's a powerful nugget. I might steal that one, Shiva. I'm not going to lie. I think that one's coming with me to work, because that is so powerful. And I think leaders sometimes forget the weight that we carry when we assume these leadership positions. I tell people, from being a military leader to now in the corporate space, and then of course being in HR, it's quite remarkable to watch the impact one good or one bad leader can have on not only the organization, but individuals as humans, right? It's quite a powerful impact. So switching gears just a little bit, we had talked about DEI work a little bit earlier in the conversation, and I'm curious your perspective on the newest trend of companies walking back their DEI.
Oh, taking away the investment that they had initially put in.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So it's an about face. You see all these DEI professionals being exited or resources being taken away, and they're just left on the vine to die. What's your thoughts on that?
To be honest, I try not to read that stuff too much because it'll drive me crazy if I do. So I'm not as knowledgeable as I should be. But from what I have seen and heard and experienced, one, I think it's not a global thing. I think a lot of that news is coming out from North America, not necessarily the rest of the world. I see in Europe, where my clients are, I'm getting more requests for DEI than I had in the past. So that's what I mean by I think it's a regional thing, and we got to be careful in general. And I say this for myself too, like we tend to center what's happening in the United States as that's what's happening everywhere else. But it's not. However, what happens in the United States, unfortunately, is a very strong force for what will happen in the rest of the world, right? Like the rest of the world, unfortunately, takes a lot of cues from what's happening in the United States. So it could be that a couple of years from now, we'll be going through what the US is going through. But I think some of the things it could be is, one, people are obsessed in organizations, and I see this with all my clients. They want quick wins. It's all short-term thinking. They want things now, right? Anything involving justice is a long-term game. It is planting the seeds now, knowing that you may never see the fruits of it in your lifetime. And organizations nowadays are not used to that thinking. It is purely now, right? That part of that then leads to a sense of urgency. So if I don't see quick wins now, is it really worth it? Are we getting our return on investment? What is our return on investment here? I think actually that might be one of the biggest things going on. And then we're also seeing in general around the world an increase in fascism in the extreme right. And those groups and those paradigms have a lot of power, more power than we are willing to accept. And they are very well organized, and they are very good at putting pressure on shareholders, which then put pressure on boards, which then put pressure on CEOs, which then it trickles down. So I think those are probably the two biggest things, that obsession with the short term, with profit now, where's the return on investment, and that the rise of the extreme. And there was something else I was going to say in there. I forgot what the last thing was. But those are the two things coming to my mind right now.
I think you make a good point. I think we do sometimes, and I'm guilty of it, right? Obviously, I'm in the thick of what's happening here stateside, obviously watching the trends very closely. And you forget not everyone else is doing the craziness that's happening here. I think it's a super solid point. Okay, last question on this DEI, what's going on within organizations topic. There's been a concept that I think leaders tend to struggle with in the context of this work, and it's the difference between equality and equity. And you hear a lot from maybe junior leaders, but there's a handful of senior knuckleheads that can't figure this out either. And it's this desire to be consistent with your actions under the guise of, well, I just want to treat everybody
Oh, God.
same. I know, I make the same. I want to tip my desk over and throw myself into the canal every time I hear this. So I'm glad we all have the same reaction to it. Would love your thoughts on that whole concept.
I mean, I can explain for me what the difference is between equity and equality and why we need to have a focus more on equity. But I also want to talk about why we need to take a step further. So there's an image that I love to use, which I don't know if you've all seen. It's an image of a tree that's bent. So it's a big tree with a big green canopy, but the trunk of it is bent over, let's say, to the left-hand side. And it shows two little figures standing on the ground trying to access the apples that are on that tree. Now, the figure that's on the left-hand side, where the tree is curved down, has easier access to the apple than the figure on the right-hand side. And then, so that's the idea of inequality, right? You have easier access to something than somebody else. The idea of equality would be, all right, let's give them both a ladder. We're going to give them both the same exact ladder that goes to the same exact height. So you give them both a ladder, the same exact ladder. The one on the left-hand side can reach the apples because the tree is tilted towards them. So they could easily pull the apple from the tree. The one on the right-hand side, even though they have the same exact ladder, still cannot access the apples on the tree because the tree is just too tilted. So that's that idea of equality. You're giving them the same resources and expecting the same outcome. But you can't because the tree is twisted. It's bent. The next image is, all right, so to fix this, we're going to keep the one on the left, the one who's closer to the tree anyway. That ladder is going to stay the same, but the one on the right, we're going to give them a taller ladder. So the ladder is going to be different than the one on the left, and the ladder on the right is going to be taller so that they can access the apples on the tree. That's equity, giving people the different resources they need to be able to reach the same outcomes. But, and this is what I love, but the whole freaking problem starts with the tree being bent to begin with. We don't need to give people different resources. Yes. Exactly. Yes. We're just trying to fix the symptoms. We're not getting to the root cause of it. The root cause is the tree is bent and the tree is the system. Mm-hmm. So that's what, when we talk about justice, we talk about taking that tree that's bent and giving it braces and getting it to right itself up, right? So that both sides can have equal access. That's justice. And so when we talk about equity is just a way to survive a system that is not equal, what we really should be getting towards is justice, where we're fixing that system. Only in a system that is truly justice focused, where the tree is completely straight, only then would we possibly be able to, and I'm not saying it's even it would be the best idea, but that only in that case, in this tree simulation, could we possibly give both sides the same exact ladder, because the system itself had been fixed.
Gosh, resonate on this. There are so many different visuals with this. And to your point, a lot of companies, a lot of teams, a lot of leaders, a lot of resources out there stop at equality because it's just easy, right? It's checkboxes, right? Performance reviews, talent roadmaps, trainings, blah, 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 whatever. Like this check, done. The equity thing, it's very few leaders, not organizations, but leaders who take the time and effort to see, well, okay, how do I help this person get a leg up? And justice, good Lord, like we're waiting on justice to be served on so many like larger systemic challenges, like in a work environment, it's very rarely found or even discussed ever. So we covered so much. I feel like we could have another hour of us having in conversation with you. I wrote down a couple of kind of key takeaways. And then, Olivia, I want to bring you home. And before that, Shiva, I'd love for you to share with our audience where they can find you, how they can support your work, what kind of work you do as well. So that we have a lot of folks in corporate spaces who are seeking cultural intelligence, leadership coaches, and advisors. I don't know what the right title is, so please pardon me. And I feel like it would be so great to bring you on. But two things I wrote down here was, one, take the time to write out and think through your origin story to all our audience members. This weekend or wherever it is, this week, whatever it is, just literally take an hour out and start the work. It is the most powerful gift you can give yourself as you occupy spaces that don't start with, hi, I'm Archita and I work for. And then two, recognize the dichotomy that exists in us between the good and the bad, and do the work to unlearn aspects of the bad, but know that it will take time, but do the work. It's no cop-out for one training, outside of all of the other things we spoke about. So Shiva, over to you, and then Olivia to bring us back. So any closing thoughts there, Shiva, and then where people can find you?
Closing thoughts. This is hard. I'm like, there's so many things. The different resources that we mentioned throughout this, I really do recommend you check them out. So Tema Okun's Characteristics of White Supremacy Culture. Allow yourself to be open to hearing what they have to say. Tema has a beautiful way of explaining it in a way that you will get triggered, but that is deeply rooted in understanding the histories and the paradigms. And she just walks you through it with love. Ways to find me. LinkedIn, unfortunately, is the place to find me. And I say unfortunately because I'm just waiting for a much better platform than the one we have already. So that's probably the best way. Shiva Roofeh that's the easiest way to find me. And the work that I do, I don't know how to name myself either. I call myself an organizational justice practitioner, which is something that I borrowed from a good friend of mine, Faizeen Fazad. And the work that I do in that, it is cultural intelligence learning. It's also leadership learning. But what I thrive in and what I love to do is not just the design and the delivery of a one-off session, but what I do mostly is design longer term programs. So anything from 9 months, 1 week, but trying to make it a way that you build a community together, because that's what's going to keep the learning moving forward. Nothing is ever done alone. Yeah. And this is where I'm like, I don't know how to sell myself, to be perfectly honest. That I could tell my origin story beautifully, but what I do is hard to explain unless you experience it. So learning development designer is probably the best way. Facilitator, educator, orchestrator.
I love it. Your work is so important, and the passion that you bring to it definitely shines through. Shiva, I wish we had more time just to chat, but we will definitely keep you in the community here and hopefully continue to keep in contact. So for everyone listening, thank you as always for tuning in. A couple of things that Shiva said that stuck out to me: as leaders, you have to remain curious no matter what. Even if you're triggered by your learnings for your own self, it is an honor and a privilege to lead people, and you will have an impact on their lives. So the least that you could do is do a little work on yourself so that you don't pass down 7 generations worth of trauma.
Oh my God.
So with that being said, as always, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Until next time.